headlines on this Tuesday afternoon, July 26th. South Korea has announced 99,327 new COVID-19 infections on this Tuesday, the highest in 97 days. Authorities are calling for public vigilance and prompt testing. President Yoon is finding fault with police officers protesting against his efforts to establish a bureau within the Interior Ministry to oversee police affairs. And South Korea's economy marked an unexpected expansion in the second quarter, boosted by strong private consumption amid eased COVID-19 related restrictions. The rate of COVID-19 transmissions is picking up pace here on the local front. South Korea's daily tally has soared to a high last seen about 100 days ago, amid yet another confirmation of the highly infectious Omicron subvariant, the BA.2.75, here in the country. My colleague Arirang starts us off.
A full COVID-19 resurgence is now becoming a reality here in South Korea. The country reported 99,327 new infections on Tuesday, an increase of over 63,000 from a day before. That's the highest tally in over 3 months. 168 critically ill patients were reported, up 24 from a day earlier. Meanwhile, the first locally transmitted case of the Omicron subvariant, BA.2.75, dubbed Centaurus, was confirmed on Monday. That brings the total number of infections in the country to 4. The newly confirmed case is reportedly an acquaintance of the second person known to have been infected who entered the country from India on July 5th. And there are some concerns as the latest patient was triple vaxxed. Korea's Central Disease Control Headquarters said that the latest case tested positive 9 days after his final contact with the second confirmed case, which exceeds the maximum 8 days incubation period of the Omicron variant. Health authorities aim to investigate more of the confirmed Centaurus cases to confirm the incubation period of the variant. Meanwhile, the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency will announce its plan to roll out an Omicron adaptive vaccination program in late August. The authorities said on Monday that it's currently assessing its effectiveness and safety to determine the right time for distribution. Earlier this month, health officials discussed supply of the new vaccine with Moderna and Pfizer. The vaccine is expected to prevent infection with Omicron itself, as previous vaccines were only used to prevent critical illness or deaths due to the Omicron variant. Questions remain over whether the vaccine will be effective for the Centaurus subvariant. 이대현, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol is finding fault with police authorities protesting his plans to create a police supervisory bureau under the Ministry of Interior and Safety. Do take a listen.
국방과 치안이라고 하는 것은 국가의 기본 사무고 그 최종적인 지휘 감독자는 대통령입니다. 그리고 정부가 헌법과 법에 따라 추진하는 정책과 조직 개편안에 대해서는 집단적으로 반발한다는 것이 중대한 국가의 기강문란이 될 수 있습니다.
The collective action includes last week's nationwide meeting of police authorities. Now, despite the opposition, the cabinet on this Tuesday endorsed the establishment of the bureau during its weekly meeting. Police officers and opposition political parties argue the presence of such a bureau within the Interior Ministry may serve to compromise the political neutrality of the police. At present, the National Police Agency is an independent entity under the ministry, with the latter having limited authority. The local economy expanded in the second quarter compared to the first amid greater private spending following an earlier ease in COVID-19 related restrictions. Our Jeong has more on this latest finding.
The growth rate of the South Korean economy sped up in the second quarter. The Bank of Korea reported Tuesday that the country's gross domestic product adjusted for inflation is estimated to have edged up 0.7% on quarter in the April to June period. The country's economy grew at a faster pace compared to the 0.6% growth recorded in the first quarter of this year. The central bank attributed the faster on-quarter growth to a pickup in private spending led by the easing of COVID-19 social distancing measures. Private spending rose by 3% compared to the previous quarter for the highest on-quarter increase since the second quarter of last year. This was driven by semi-durable goods, including clothes and shoes, while spending in the service sector also increased, led by restaurants, accommodation, and leisure. Public spending also grew by 1.1% compared to the previous quarter. However, exports, a major driver of the country's economy, slumped on quarter amid lockdowns in China and the war in Ukraine. Exports in the second quarter of this year shrank 3.1% compared to the preceding quarter, recording the biggest drop in 2 years. A Bank of Korea official said trade conditions worsened as import prices, including for coal and petroleum products, rose more than South Korea's main export items, including semiconductors and chemical goods. The official added that economic uncertainties remain due to soaring inflation and the recent surge in COVID-19 infections, leading to aggravated consumer sentiment. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., President Joe Biden will hold a virtual meeting with SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won on Tuesday, local time. Now, according to the White House on Monday, the two men will touch upon SK's investment in the U.S. manufacturing arena, as well as climate change technology. The meeting comes as part of Biden's drive to boost foreign investment in the U.S., especially in the chip industry. Now, Choi is currently on business in the U.S., and while the meeting had been scheduled for a face-to-face encounter, circumstances changed after Mr. Biden tested positive for COVID-19. And President Biden is urging U.S. Congress to pass a bill aimed at boosting America's semiconductor industry, citing the economic and national security imperative of securing chip production. In a video meeting Monday, Biden highlighted the importance of passing the legislation as soon as possible to make the U.S. a global chip production force. He also warned that U.S. businesses are turning to other countries, including South Korea and China, for semiconductors. Known as Chips Plus, the bill includes allocating $52 billion over the next 5 years for chip production and a 4-year 25% tax credit for new chip production. Back on the local front, South Korea's armed forces is engaged in yet another display of military readiness, this time staging its largest helicopter drill in 2 years. Our Defense Ministry correspondent Gyeonggi has this coverage.
Rockets from Apache attack helicopters precisely hit their targets on a mountain. The rockets are followed by live gunfire. The South Korean Army on Monday held its largest helicopter drill since the start of the pandemic. During the drill, Apache helicopters fired around 100 2.75-inch rockets and 440 rounds from their 33mm guns. Along with about 200 troops, 30 helicopters took part in the training. This included 16 Apache Guardians, as well as 10 Blackhawks and 4 Chinook helicopters. That's around 3 times as many aircraft as were involved in the same type of drill 2 years ago.
I'm sure this large-scale aerial training will give our citizens and our country confidence and faith in our military.
During the training, Apache helicopters also made steep turns and dives to practice the evasive maneuvers that are crucial for avoiding enemy attacks. In an actual battle, Apache helicopters will be tasked with destroying the enemy's key assets, like armored tanks. They will be followed by Blackhawks and Chinook helicopters, which will safely transport troops and supplies to the battlefield.
The Army's Air Force is crucial to win battles on land, based on its rapid mobility and strong power. We're going to really focus on the training so that we can defeat the enemy if we go on an actual mission right now.
The military said it plans to expand this type of aerial training and hold it regularly to enhance readiness. Pelosi, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korea has lent its voice to international condemnation of Myanmar's military junta for its recent executions of pro-democracy activists. According to Seoul's Foreign Ministry Tuesday, South Korea has issued a joint statement with the EU and 7 countries, including the US, Japan, and Australia. The statement denounces the executions of reprehensible acts of violence that exemplify the regime's complete disregard for human rights and the rule of law. Back on Monday, Myanmar's military junta announced the execution of 4 democracy activists accused of, quote, acts of terror. And on the international front as well, Beijing has condemned a planned visit to Taiwan by U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi. In fact, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has spoken of forceful measures should the trip take place. Our Kim Hyo-sun explains.
China has warned the U.S. that it was getting seriously prepared for the possibility of a visit by Washington's House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan next month.
Suppose the U.S. side clings obstinately to its misconduct, China is bound to take resolute and powerful measures to safeguard its national sovereignty and territorial integrity. All consequences entailing from that should be completely borne by the United States.
Coinciding with Beijing's strong rhetoric, Taiwan staged air raid drills on Monday while its military was mobilized for routine defense exercises. While there was no direct link between China's renewed threats and Taiwan's defensive moves, they do point to increased tensions in the region, considered a potential hotspot for conflict. Pelosi has not yet confirmed when or even if she will visit. If the visit does take place, it would be the first trip in 25 years by a Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives to Taipei. An earlier visit planned for April was cancelled due to COVID-19. Amid these developments, President Joe Biden said Monday that he still expects to speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping this week. He told reporters that the expected call will take place by the end of this week. This comes as Xi sent a message last week wishing Biden a speedy recovery from COVID-19. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
U.S. Congressman Ami Bera believes South Korea, the U.S. and Japan should use North Korea's 7th nuclear test, if it occurs that is, as a forcing function to strengthen their trilateral relationship. His thoughts were shared at a virtual think tank meeting for the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington on Monday. Now, Bera, who is a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, added that additional UN Security Council sanctions are not an option at the moment owing to possible opposition from China and Russia. He also cast a dark light on prospects of North Korea's disarmament in the near future and called on the international community to respond within this context. On a light note, the U.S. state of Arizona has designated October 21st as Korean Hanbok Day. Founder of the Asian American Youth Council, Brian John, said Monday that the state would be celebrating the traditional Korean attire every year. Arizona Governor Douglas A. Ducey, for his part, claimed Hanbok has been a defining aspect of traditional Korean culture, society and history for over 2,000 years. The council also pledged to continue its efforts to enact Korean Hanbok Day in other states and cities across the U.S. And those are the headlines for the first half of the Daily Report. We return with the second half in a few minutes. Stay with us.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduce a Korean New Year. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
Welcome back. Today is one of the 3 hottest days of the summer here in South Korea, also known as Jungbok, when many are encouraged to eat well to better endure the blistering heat. Now, a popular dish is ginseng chicken soup, also known as Samgyetang here in the country. Now, for more on the dining on occasions, that is, I have a panel of foreign journalists here in the studio. I have Jack Barton. Jack, welcome back.
It's great to be here again.
I also have Louis Paligiano. Louis, it's good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Jack, let's start off on a light note then. Do you know what food is normally consumed here in South Korea during the summer?
Well, we've got all sorts of energy and stamina foods in South Korea. It would take a day probably to list them all, but I think there are 3 big ones for the Bok days. One of them would be the cold bean paste soup, which is the kongguksu, very popular. After that, there would be eel, which is also very popular in this season. But of course, the king of the dishes is, as you mentioned before, the chicken dish, Samgyetang, and that is my personal favorite as well. I'm sure all the Samgyetang restaurants will be absolutely packed, given it's Jungbok today. I went in early and had one yesterday in one of those little restaurants where the ceiling is so low you have to crouch to get to your table. And it's a favorite for a number of reasons. One, I love it, but also when my Korean father-in-law was still alive, it's a dish we would always eat together. Every time we went out, we had the Samgyetang. So I think it's a perfect dish for this season, but it also brings back some good memories for me.
Right, it does. My father's dish as well, favorite, bless his soul. What about you, Louis? We understand that Samgyetang is very popular. What are your thoughts now on having this boiling bowl of Samgyetang to fight the sweltering summer here in the country? What are your thoughts on that?
So at first I was very surprised by the idea to eat some warm boiling specialty when it's so warm outside. And then I was even more surprised when actually go in the restaurant. As you said, it's very packed, with the people are queuing in front of them for the most famous in Seoul. So you have to wait some time for 30 minutes. And then you're in front of this big pot and you say, oh no, I couldn't. Do you have pat bingsu? Do you have something else? No, pat bingsu is like a kind of like a pill ice, which is very nice and look like ice cream. And you start to eat it and you are totally melting. Like your nose is running, you are sweating a lot and feel very bad. And strangely, after that, after this food, which is very tasty, enjoyable, is so nutritious. There is a lot of herbal thing inside, like jujube, like ginseng and stuff like this. You feel very revigorated, and when you go outside, you feel good. And the warmth is not so hard to, you can feel, and you understand why the close dynamic between medicine and food in Korea. At first can be surprising, but in a good way, you eat warm and the result is very effective.
Right, and staying with what Louis has just said, Jack, do you believe there's a relatively perhaps greater public interest among Koreans in food that seeks to perhaps boost your health?
I think the answer is yes. If you look all around the world, of course, it's in many cultures, particularly here in the Asia-Pacific, foods that are cooling or heating or have medicinal values, but usually in other countries we see food taken when someone is feeling a bit under the weather. Even in our culture we'll have a chicken soup if someone has a flu, or you will perhaps we see many aphrodisiac foods. There's oysters in the West, foods for the wedding night, but foods just to eat every day, which have these medicinal values, but you just incorporate it in your regular meal, and there's a real passion and awareness about that. I think that is really particular to South Korea. You don't really see that anywhere else, that kind of passion and knowledge. And I'm always amazed here because, in my culture, for a young person, a teenager, to know what the seasonal food is. If you ask them what are the seasonal foods, very few of them would be able to tell you one. Whereas you can look at, talk to some young hip-hop teens here and ask them what are the seasonal foods, and they'll tell you every single one of them. The food knowledge here is enormous, and that all feeds back into this knowledge of what food does for you on a regular basis, if you're feeling tired, if the weather is hot, if the weather is cold, if you've been pregnant, all of these factors. I think it really is. It's an art form in South Korea.
Right. And beyond South Korea then, Louis, food is also a fundamental part of culture there in France. That being said, that is, what can you tell us about perhaps the specific food enjoyed in France depending on the different seasons?
In fact, there's no special food like in Korea. Just in summer, during the hottest days, we used to have pasta or rice salad, cold pasta and cold rice mixed with olive oil and different vegetable. Or we eat like pomelo, things like this, a lot of ice cream. So not so special when it's warm, just drink a lot and have fresh food. But during the coldest day, we have a lot of specialty with cheese. It's kind of an excuse to beat the cold weather. We eat a lot of cheese, a lot of nutritious food, like a raclette. Raclette is a thing we share with a lot of friends usually. We have a little fry pan, we put cheese and we melt, and then we put the melted cheese on a boiled potato or delicatessen like smoked ham and things like this. And we enjoy like in community with good friends. And there is also fondue. Fondue is like ceramic pot where we put some melted cheese, and we have to dip some bread inside. And usually it's also with friends that we are sharing this. And if you drop your little piece of bread in the pot, they order you to do some silly challenge, like running naked in the snow or things like this. It can happen in France very often. So that's the kind of thing we do. Like, it's not really related to the warm or cold weather. It's just like tradition. Oh, it's cold. It reminds me when I went to ski. It reminds me of this mood of alpine countries. So we eat the proper food of these places.
Right, I see. Louis, is it common to have chicken soup there when you're feeling ill as well, like is the case over in Australia? What do you have when you're sick?
When you're sick, we have some veggie soup most of the time, warm veggie soup. And maybe that's all of white meat a lot.
Oh, I see.
But we don't mix chicken in a soup. No, that's not something we do.
I see, all right, I see. Jack, what about you? What can you tell us about the food consumed over in Australia during the sizzling summer?
It's a complicated answer because Australia has so many different ethnicities, about 240 ethnicities. 50% of the population are either born outside the country or have one or both parents who are born outside the country. So it's a big mix of all different traditions. Having said that, and it's middle of winter, of course, right now in Australia, because we're on the upside down of the world, or the top side, depending on which way you look at the globe. The barbecue in the middle of summer. It seems counterintuitive that on the hottest days you would go outside into the sun, cover yourself in sunscreen, and either in the backyard or preferably for everyone at the beach, you do a big barbecue. Now this used to be an Anglo-Australian habit, but now you're seeing everybody. If you go to the beach, you'll see Vietnamese families or different groups coming together. It's become very fancy, the cooking these days. At the barbecue, you'll have, the bell peppers with their skins roasting and marinade seafood. But when I was young, it was just steak, that had the consistency and the taste probably similar to the sole on your shoe, and sausages burnt to a crisp so that they were black, put on a piece of white bread with tomato sauce. I know it sounds horrific, but if you're brought up with it, my mouth almost waters. Thinking about it. And when you see a barbecue today in the Bok days, it would be in Australia, they don't think of it as that, but the hottest days of the year, you'll have the barbecue, you'll still have all these fancy foods, but in the corner there will still be the burnt sausages.
Right, I see. I suppose we're also consuming the memory then of all that.
Absolutely.
Louis, as mentioned earlier then, food and culture intertwined. What does Korea's food perhaps tell you about its people and their culture?
As we said before, we can see the relation between medicine, health, and food, which is pretty intricate. And even for the youngest generation, we know very well, like every food have a purpose. Every panchan, every side dishes is for something. Like little fish, is like a calcium, and for everything is on the table for a reason. So you can really feel this. Like food is precious and important here. You can have this feeling, and also it's often related to the mood. Like when people are feeling depressed, they like to eat spicy food. You said fight heat with heat. It's a little bit like fighting emotional pain with
something
fire,
physical.
Yeah, fire in your mouth, and you forget your problem when you lick tteokbokki with a very spicy sauce. So related to emotion, related to medicine, and also related to kind of collectivist society, traditionally. And people like to share everything. When you order a dish here, you can expect that your Korean friend wants to taste a bit, and all the panchan you eat together with the same chopstick and everything. And it's a big difference in France, for example. When you order something in the restaurant, what is in your plates, it's for you, only for you, and you can be very angry if someone try to take some of your sandwich or some of your steak or something. You don't do that in France so much. So here it's not about sharing, so it says a lot about the personality of Korean.
Right, and staying with the idea of sharing, side dishes, as Louis mentioned, Panchan, they're often refilled at restaurants here in the country. Jack, what does that practice of refilling Panchan, free of charge also, tell you about or reflect about Korea's culture?
Well, I think the whole food culture here is very similar to what Louis was just saying. In the West, you have the culture of individualism, where the individual trumps the group or trumps the society, and the needs of the individual trump everything else. Whereas here, that's turned on its head, and the needs of the group, and particularly of your friends and family, far outweigh the needs of the individual, to the point where the individual is almost erased. And we see that in the banchan and in the dishes. We see that in the way that people eat, with the sense of nunchi. You know, it's not just about sharing the food, it's about the pecking order of who's the oldest, who's the youngest. We particularly see that when the drinks come out amongst the men. There are all sorts of things going on that for a Westerner, they might not even be aware this is going on at the table. It might look invisible, but to a Korean, it's incredibly important. Who's pouring what? Who's doing what? And it all comes down to a sense of collectivism, but within that collectivism also the old Confucius idea of the responsibilities of each person, that person knowing what they are and fulfilling those responsibilities, and thus fulfilling that function and showing that you can work together as a family or as a group, as a team at the table. I think that's something great, and I've become the annoying person in the West now who has to try something from everybody else's plate and make everyone
I see. Totally understood though. Yeah. Louis, beyond seasons then, food also plays an important role depending on the occasion. Here in South Korea, women would have seaweed soup perhaps after giving birth to a child. And that being said, is there a similar dining recommendation for French women after or during their postpartum period?
It's very different. In fact, it's not discussed a lot. We just say a woman needs protein, eggs and red meat for iron, things like this. But there is no special dish, and in fact, there is few recommendations. We just say for breastfeeding women, it would be better if they have organic food. That's the main advice doctors are giving, or special food if they are overweight or underweight or have diabetes. In fact, if there is a health issue, they they ask them to have some specific kind of food, but if there's no problems, they can eat whatever they want. And I know it's very surprising here because when you're a woman, when you just give birth, if you don't have your seaweed soup immediately, like your mother or your mother-in-law think you will not survive. It's very important. And also I have a Korean coworker who gave birth in the US, and they gave her like kind of snacks with a glass of water and a hot dog after she gave birth. And I feel like she kept a little trauma from this.
Yes, my mother as well, because my baby sister was born abroad and she didn't understand how you were given tea and toast and not something else for breakfast. And Jack, what's the case like in Australia?
Again, you know, it's a big cultural mix there, so each different culture has its way, but the general health advice is actually not so heavy on the protein. It's more about fresh vegetables, getting in lots of things like bell peppers full of vitamin C, non-saturated fats through avocados, Australian fruits like mango and from the tropical north, but also whole grains, so whole oats, brown rice, brown bread, this sort of thing. And as you mentioned, organic, Lewis, a very big focus on organic, getting away from chemicals. So that is the official advice, you know, coming from the medical community. Most people follow that. I tend to think it probably is a little incomplete because there is no seaweed soup on it.
Right, I see. Louis, in some cases, what is consumed or practiced in one culture, it's not consumed or practiced in another. And that being said, do you suppose we need to perhaps respect these diverse dining cultures? Or should we seek a shared experience, one that is understood by all global diners, so to speak?
I think it's important that every culinary tradition respected more than everything. Like, it's not good to water down a Korean dish because some people cannot eat spicy. I know some are complaining that in every broth there is a meat product or thing like this. So it's very hard sometimes for vegan or vegetarian to find their food. What is important is to have choice, in fact. And I think in a country like Korea, you have choice with like bibimbap and things like this. You can totally have it without egg, without meat or things like this. So it's important to keep the identity for this. And I heard a lot of people, foreigners, coming here. And in the first days, they are complaining about the specificity of the food here. And they want to have pizza, they want to have stuff like this. And I recommend to them, no, try more. You will get used to it, and it's part of the fun. Like when you visit a country, when you live in a new country, to eat like the local, it's one of the main pleasure and one of the most important things. So once again, do not water down the culinary history of Korea. It's a priority for me.
Right. And what are your thoughts on the matter, Jack? What do you think about respecting diverse dining cultures?
Absolutely. If you look around the world today, we all sort of dress the same. We have the same haircuts. If you go to the high street here or London, you'll see the same kinds of shops, or Melbourne, anywhere. There is homogeneity through just about everything. The last bastion of our cultural heritage usually comes through food in most cases. So we don't need to go out of our way and protect it because it's what people grow up and they love it and they don't want to get rid of it. But I think it's wonderful. You go to a country and it's the one thing that will tell you something about the people, because everything else, it looks kind of same, but the food will tell you volumes about the society you're in, the way it's eaten will tell you volumes about the society. So I think it's wonderful. One of the great things of going to another country, as you mentioned, don't eat the food that you eat at home. Go, have the local dining experience, enjoy the food, but also get a cultural lesson while you're eating it.
Right, I completely agree. All right, Jack, thank you so much for your insight today. And Louis, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. On the local front, parliamentary Q&A sessions on state affairs continue on this Tuesday, with the economy taking centre stage today. Back on Monday, government officials addressed questions on politics. Our Kim Bo-kyung has details.
A 3D interpellation session, the very first since the Yoon administration began, got underway on Monday. The first day focused on politics, diplomacy, and national security with a total of 6 government officials present, including the South Korean Prime Minister and relevant ministers. As this was the first time for Prime Minister Han Duck-soo to be grilled by lawmakers since taking office, he faced several questions regarding his future plans. While saying the current economic crisis came from expanded fiscal and monetary policies that were taken to counter the 2008 financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic, Han pledged to come up with new ways to help the economy recover. He also added that the Yoon administration will help South Korea become a country that's more globally respected.
Excessive liquidity, disruption in global supply chains, geological issues such as relationships between the US and China, the US and Russia are the short-term difficulties this administration needs to tackle. For the long term, it is an important period to solve reformative issues to make the country have a strong economy, security and culture, thus to be globally respected.
Lawmakers' questions were also fielded by Interior Minister Lee Sang-min on the new police bureau that will be established under his ministry. Lee addressed concerns that the new bureau, which will give the police more investigative power, might compromise neutrality and accountability.
If you specifically take a look at the work the Police Bureau would do and a set of commanding regulations, those concerns would be resolved. The Interior Minister does not have in mind to investigate or be included in specific event.
Another controversial issue discussed was concerning the North Korean fishermen who were repatriated in 2019. On this, the unification minister stressed it was wrong and a typical totalitarian way of thinking to send them back just because they were felons. The President's National Security Office said during the briefing on Monday that they have not received any information from the previous government on the matter, and that surprisingly there wasn't much information to refer to. After Monday's topic, the lawmakers' Q&A session will continue for the next 2 days, covering matters that are related to economy and social issues. Again, fierce debate is expected due to the current economic crisis and soaring numbers of new COVID-19 cases. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And staying within the parliament, members of the Yoon administration also took questions on North Korea's nuclear ambitions and on their intentions to promote ties with neighboring Japan. Here's Kim Da-mi.
North Korea possesses a significant amount of nuclear materials, and in fact, it's been actively producing them for the past 5 years. That's what South Korea's defense minister confirmed on Monday during Parliament's inquiry into the Yoon administration. He said the exact amount cannot be disclosed, but the plutonium and uranium produced and possessed by the North has increased by around 10%. He added that Pyongyang is on the verge of staging its 7th nuclear test, which reflects the region's pursuit of a smaller and a lighter nuclear weapons. Calling these military ambitions a clear threat to the international community, Minister Lee said Seoul will make the most out of Washington's extended deterrence policy and reinforce its response capabilities. President Yoon's Minister of Unification also addressed the North Korea's nuclear program, explaining that the administration's so-called bold plan includes economic support for the North if it takes substantial steps to give up its nuclear weapons. Also on the first day of the 3-day hearing, South Korea's foreign minister hinted at a possible summit between the leaders of Seoul and Tokyo, but under certain conditions. He said he is hopeful that a South Korean-Japan summit will naturally be held once desirable solutions to pending issues have been laid out, including a solution for the issue of compensation for the Koreans Japan subjected to forced labor. He then reiterated the ministry's strong determination to come up with the most reasonable and acceptable solution for both countries while respecting the views of the victims as much as possible. The minister further vowed all he can do so that visa waivers for the both countries can be restored. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol is poised to play host to his Indonesian counterpart this week. The two leaders will address ways to boost bilateral economic ties and regional security. Our presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
The Yoon Suk-yeol government is accelerating diplomacy with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, starting with a bilateral summit with the visiting president of Indonesia this week.
President Yoon will discuss bilateral cooperation issues in various fields, including defense industry, infrastructure, and economic security. There will also be in-depth discussions on global issues, including our Indo-Pacific strategy and cooperation with the ASEAN.
Introducing Joko Widodo's two-day official visit to Seoul from Wednesday, the South Korean leader's top security aide made note of the existing strategic partnership between South Korea and Indonesia and emphasized that the upcoming summit will herald the administration's ASEAN diplomacy.
We expect President Widodo's visit this time to not only strengthen Korea-Indonesia relations, but also signal the beginning of the Yoon Suk-yeol government's full-scale diplomacy with the ASEAN.
Both countries are joining members of the U.S.-led IPEF, and Seoul expects further cooperation with the Southeast Asian country, which accounts for more than a third of the total GDP of the ASEAN. Also on the summit agenda will likely be the joint fighter development project between the two countries, the share of cost of which Indonesia has yet to pay up, but one that the presidential office says is hopeful it will be resolved soon. Prior to the summit Thursday afternoon, the Indonesian leader will meet with South Korean business leaders and visit a Hyundai Motors Technology Institute. Expanding diplomatic horizons to strengthen economic security is one of President Yoon's key foreign policy priorities. How his government's ASEAN policy will distinguish itself from the previous administration's New Southern policy remains to be seen. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
On the corporate front, Samsung Electronics is taking chip making to the next level, if you will, having begun mass production using the advanced 3nm technology late last month and shipments this week. Our Yoon has more on this feat.
The semiconductor industry is entering a critical new chapter. South Korea's Samsung Electronics has started to ship the world's first 3nm chips. In a ceremony to mark the first shipments on Monday, the tech giant said the new technology will be a game changer in the semiconductor industry.
This new technology is the key to continuously improving power efficiency and performance. Also, it is highly flexible and applicable to a variety of uses.
Last month, the company announced that it had become the world's first to start mass-producing semiconductors using a 3nm process. Samsung used the new technique, its so-called gate-all-around transistor architecture, to produce chips that are more powerful and efficient. Compared to conventional technology, these can reduce power consumption by up to 50% and can also improve performance by up to 30%. The official said the new technology will help the tech giant become a leader in the foundry market or contract chip manufacturing.
We expect the new technology to be the foundation for growth in semiconductor industry. It would also be the major driver for Samsung to become the leader in the foundry market.
Samsung currently is the largest player in the global memory chip market, but it's second place in the foundry market. According to market tracker TrendForce, Samsung's foundry market share is about 16%. The market is dominated by its Taiwanese competitor TSMC, which accounts for more than half of it by revenue. An expert says to secure customers, Samsung should minimize its defect rate because Samsung and TSMC are competing for large multi-year orders from customers such as Qualcomm and Apple.
The starting point for mass production is very important, as it helps gain time ahead of any competitors. TSMC is planning to start production of 3nm chips at the end of this year, so it is 6 months behind.
At Monday's ceremony, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy said the new chips are significant in terms of the country's economic security.
Going forward, South Korea will gain more stature in contributing to the global chip supply chain, not only in memory but also in system chips.
The government last week announced an ambitious plan for the country to become a chip superpower. By 2026, tax benefits will be expanded to help firms to invest some $260 billion in semiconductors and fund the establishment of semiconductor complexes. Yoon, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Reports indicate that supplies from Russia's gas pipeline to Europe will be tightened. The already reduced gas supplies coming from Russia's Nord Stream 1 look set to be squeezed tighter still, and that's according to a statement on Monday by Russia's state-owned Gazprom. It said that from Wednesday 4 a.m. local time, supplies will halve from 40% to just 20% capacity. In numbers, this means that flows from Russia into Europe through Germany will fall to 33 million cubic meters per day. Gazprom claimed that it's halting a gas turbine's operation due to maintenance work, a claim that's been contested by German officials. The reduced capacity will likely make it more difficult for EU countries to replenish their gas stores before winter and follows a recent 10-day maintenance shutdown of the pipeline. Reports from Myanmar on Monday say the military junta has executed 4 pro-democracy activists, marking the first time in over 30 years such punishments have been carried out. Among those killed were 2 prominent resistance leaders, including a deposed pro-democracy lawmaker. They were accused of committing, quote, terror acts and sentenced to death in a closed-door trial, criticized by rights groups as being unjust. The executions have drawn global backlash, with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken condemning the killings. State media reported that they were charged under counter-terrorism laws, but failed to specify when or how they were executed. China is one step closer to completing its orbital outpost after successfully docking a second laboratory module to its space station. The news was announced by the China Manned Space Agency on Monday. Called the Wuntian module, the 23 metric ton spacecraft is China's largest ever. It was launched on Sunday and successfully docked with the Tiangong space station after a 13-hour flight. The module will allow various biotechnological experiments under changing gravity conditions. It also has a robotic arm for external experiments and an additional airlock for spacewalks. Venice is introducing an entrance fee to day trippers looking to visit the iconic Italian city. Trials of the measure started this summer ahead of full implementation in 2023. The fees will range from $3 to $10 with the price based on the season. The fees will only apply to tourists on day trips, as those staying overnight will have their fees included in tax charged on their hotel bill. Those wanting to visit will need to register ahead of time. The local government says the measures are a solution to over-tourism, as the floating city sees some 20 million visitors annually. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
This new system is about finding a balance.
Good Tuesday afternoon. Extreme heat is becoming persistent. Now heat alerts are in place everywhere, including Seoul. And the most vulnerable area of the country is Daegu, one of the hottest cities in Korea. Seoul and Gwangju also reaching 33 degrees. And we're expecting showers in many inland regions later today. Precipitation will vary from 5 to 40 millimeters, which could be followed by gust or lightning. The rain could be in the form of torrential downpours with stormy conditions, so stay safe if you're out and about. While those areas not affected by showers will have a high UV index and ozone levels, the UV index is going to be very high in most regions, so put on your sunblock thoroughly to avoid sunburn. And also be mindful of the high ozone level, as ozone can't be filtered out by a mask. We're going to be battling heat day and night for the time being, and scattered showers can't be ruled out. So try to avoid outdoor activities during the middle of the day, if possible. Now, let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of the Daily Report. We'll be back with more coverage tomorrow. That is Wednesday. Join us then.